Captain Jake Morrison stared at the screen in front of him. The numbers made no sense. Energy readings from the Kepler 442 system were off the charts. His ship, the UES Ironclad, had been traveling through space for 3 weeks to get here. Now, he was starting to wonder if this trip was worth it. "Captain, you need to see this," said Dr. Lisa Grant. She was the ship's science officer and the smartest person Jake had ever met. Her voice was shaking, which was never a good sign. Jake walked over to her station. On her screen was a picture of something that shouldn't exist. It looked like a massive ring floating in space around a planet. The ring was so big, it could fit Earth inside it 10 times over. Strange blue and white energy danced around its surface like lightning. "What am I looking at, Lisa?" Jake asked. "I don't know," she said. "Whatever it is, it's old. Really old. The metal shows signs of being here for millions of years. But the energy readings are fresh. It's like someone just turned it on." Commander Tony Blake looked up from his engineering station. He was the kind of man who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. "Captain, that thing is putting out more power than our entire home fleet. If it wanted to hurt us, we'd already be space dust." Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, their communications officer, turned in her chair. "Sir, I'm not picking up any signals from it. No radio, no laser, nothing. It's completely silent." Jake made a decision that would change everything. "Take us closer, but keep our shields up and weapons ready." The ironclad moved slowly toward the giant ring. As they got closer, Jake could see that it wasn't just floating in space. It was working. Parts of it moved and turned. Energy flowed through channels carved into its surface. It looked like some kind of factory or workshop, but bigger than anything humans had ever built. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice getting more excited, "I'm reading some kind of scanning beam. It's looking at us." "Is it dangerous?" Jake asked. "I don't think so. It feels more like curiosity." Suddenly, every screen on the bridge lit up. The ring was sending them information, not in words or pictures, but somehow they all understood what it meant. The ring was asking them a question. "Are you ready to be tested?" Tony stood up from his station. "Captain, I don't like this. Whatever that thing is, it's been waiting here for a very long time, waiting for someone to find it." "What kind of test?" Amy asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. The ring responded by opening. A section of it folded back like a flower blooming, revealing a chamber inside that was big enough to hold their ship. Light poured out of the opening, not harsh and bright, but warm and inviting. "It wants us to go inside," Lisa said. "Captain, this could be the discovery of a lifetime. This technology is beyond anything we've ever seen." Jake looked at his crew. They were good people. They had families back home, dreams, hopes for the future. If he made the wrong choice here, he might be sending them all to their deaths. But he also knew what kind of people they were. They had signed up to explore the unknown, to push the boundaries of what was possible. They were the kind of humans who looked at the impossible and said, "Let's try it anyway." "All right," Jake said. "But we go in ready for anything. Tony, I want our engines ready for a quick exit. Amy, keep trying to contact Earth. Lisa, record everything." The ironclad slowly entered the chamber inside the ring. As soon as they were inside, the opening closed behind them. They were trapped, but somehow none of them felt afraid. The chamber was beautiful. The walls were covered in patterns that seemed to move and shift. Energy flowed through them like rivers of light. "Captain," Tony said, "something's happening to our ship." Jake could feel it too. The ironclad was changing, not breaking or being damaged, but being improved. The engines were running smoother. The shields were stronger. Even the air felt cleaner. "It's fixing our ship," Lisa said in wonder. "Making it better." Then the real test began. The chamber filled with images, not on screens, but floating in the air around them. They saw the history of the galaxy. Millions of years of civilizations rising and falling. Some grew strong and spread to the stars. Others destroyed themselves. A few simply vanished without a trace. But through it all, something was watching. something dark and hungry that lived in the spaces between worlds. It fed on the fear and despair of dying civilizations. It had been doing this for so long that most species never even knew it existed. The images showed what happened when this dark thing found a new species. Most ran and hid. Some tried to fight but were too afraid to win. Others simply gave up and let themselves be consumed. It's showing us what we're going to face, Jake realized. This isn't just a test, it's training. The ring was preparing them for war, not against other humans or even aliens, but against something that had been the enemy of all life for millions of years, something that had been waiting for the right species to challenge it. The chamber began to change them too. Jake could feel his mind expanding, able to think faster and see further. His crew was changing as well. They were becoming more than human, but they were still themselves. "Captain," Amy said, "I'm getting a signal, not from Earth, from somewhere else, somewhere far away and very angry." Jake smiled. For the first time in his life, he felt truly ready for anything. "Good," he said. "Let them come. We'll be waiting." The Forge had found humanity, and humanity had accepted its challenge. Across the galaxy, ancient eyes opened and looked toward Earth with interest. The game was about to begin, and this time, the prey might just bite back. 3 days had passed since the ironclad entered the Forge. Back on Earth, Admiral Kate Sullivan stared at the last message they had received from Captain Morrison's ship. The words were simple, but chilling. "We have made contact, preparing for what comes next." Kate stood in the command center of Luna Base, humanity's largest military station. Around her, dozens of officers worked at their stations, trying to understand what was happening at Kepler 442. The Forge was sending signals across space, and every human colony was picking them up. "Admiral," said Colonel Dan Roberts, her second in command, "we're getting reports from all 17 colonies. The signals are getting stronger. Whatever that thing is, it's not trying to hide anymore." Kate nodded. She had been a soldier for 30 years and had seen humanity fight through 3 wars with alien species. But this felt different. This felt bigger than anything they had faced before. Dr. Richard Hayes, the government's top expert on alien technology, walked into the command center. He looked tired and worried. "Admiral, I've been studying the signals from the Forge. It's not just communicating with us. It's communicating with something else, something that's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Kate asked. "For us to find it," Richard said. "Admiral, I think we've walked into a trap that's been set for millions of years." On Mars Colony, Dr. Ellen Wright was having the same troubling thoughts. She led a team of scientists who studied ancient alien ruins. For years, they had found evidence of civilizations that had simply vanished. No war, no disaster, just gone. Now she was starting to understand why. "Look at this," she said to her assistant, Dr. Mark Johnson. On the screen in front of them was a timeline of galactic history. Every 50,000 years, a major civilization disappears, always at the peak of their power, always when they start to spread across the stars. Mark studied the data. It's like something is hunting them, waiting for them to get strong enough to be worth the effort. Ellen felt a chill run down her spine. And now it's humanity's turn. Back at the Forge, Captain Morrison and his crew were learning things that no human was meant to know. The chamber had become a classroom, and they were the students. But the lessons were hard and dangerous. Jake watched as images filled the air around them. He saw species after species discover the Forge. Most ran away in fear. A few stayed and tried to learn. But in the end, they all faced the same choice: fight or die. "Captain," said Lisa, "I'm reading something new. The Forge is showing us how to see beyond normal space. There are layers to reality that we never knew existed." Tony was studying the ship's new systems. The Forge had given the ironclad abilities that should have been impossible. "Captain, we can travel between dimensions now. I don't understand how, but the ship knows what to do." Amy was still trying to contact Earth, but now she was picking up other signals, voices from across the galaxy, other species that had found similar forges on their worlds. Most of the voices were afraid. "There's something coming," one voice said. "We can feel it in the space between worlds. It's hungry and it's been waiting for so long." "We tried to fight," said another voice. "But it's too strong. It feeds on our fear and despair. The more afraid we are, the stronger it gets." Jake made a decision. "Amy, broadcast on all frequencies. Tell them that humanity is here and we're not afraid." Amy looked at him with surprise. "Captain, we don't even know what we're fighting yet." "Doesn't matter," Jake said. "Fear is what killed the others. If we're going to die, we're going to die as humans, and humans don't give up." The message went out across space. On Earth, Admiral Sullivan heard it. On Mars, Dr. Wright heard it. Across all 17 human colonies, people heard Captain Morrison's words and felt something they hadn't felt in days. Hope. But the message reached other ears too. In the space between dimensions, something ancient and hungry heard the defiant words of humanity and smiled. Another species had found the forge. Another civilization was about to feed its endless hunger. The Watchers had been patient for so long. They had learned to wait until species were at their strongest before consuming them. Fear tasted better when it came from those who thought they were powerful. Despair was sweeter when it crushed hope. They began to move through the dimensional barriers, testing the strength of reality around Earth and its colonies. Soon, they would break through and begin the harvest. President Nicole Thompson called an emergency meeting of the Colonial Council. Representatives from all 17 worlds gathered in virtual reality to discuss the crisis. "We have two choices," she said. "We can evacuate everyone to the outer colonies and hope that distance will save us, or we can prepare to fight something we don't understand." "What does the military say?" asked Governor Bill Turner of New Texas Colony. Admiral Sullivan appeared on the screen. "We have ships and weapons, but honestly, we don't know if they'll work against whatever is coming. The Forge is changing our technology, making it better, but we're still learning how to use it." Dr. Hayes stood up. "I've been studying the records from other species that faced this threat. The ones that ran all died. The ones that fought lasted longer, but they still lost. There's only one thing that might make a difference." "What's that?" President Thompson asked. "Unity," Hayes said. "Every species that survived long enough to leave records talked about working together. Not just their own kind, but everyone. The thing that's coming, it wins by dividing us, by making us afraid of each other." Back at the Forge, Jake and his crew felt the change. The chamber began to prepare them for what was coming. They could sense things now that they had never imagined. The space between stars wasn't empty. It was full of watching eyes and hungry mouths. "Captain," Lisa said, "I can feel them. They're coming." Jake nodded. The Forge had shown him what they faced. Ancient beings that had fed on civilizations for millions of years. They were older than stars, hungrier than black holes, and more patient than time itself. But Jake smiled. He had seen something else in the Forge's lessons. Every species that had faced the Watchers had one thing in common. They had faced them alone. Humanity wouldn't make that mistake. "Amy," he said, "send a message to Earth. Tell them to prepare every ship, every weapon, every person. We're not running and we're not hiding. When they come, we'll be ready." The Forge pulsed with approval. For the first time in millions of years, it had found a species that understood the real test. The challenge wasn't just to survive, it was to fight back. In the darkness between worlds, the Watchers felt something they hadn't experienced in eons: uncertainty. This new species was different. They weren't running, they weren't begging, they were preparing for war. The game had begun, and for the first time the Watchers weren't sure they would win. The first crack in reality appeared above New York City on a Tuesday morning. People looked up from their coffee and breakfast to see a line of darkness cutting across the blue sky. It wasn't a shadow or a cloud. It was nothing. A place where space itself had been torn open. Commander Steve Phillips was in his office at Earth Defense Command when the alarm started screaming. He ran to the main screen and saw something that made his blood freeze. Through the crack in the sky, eyes were looking down at the city. Not human eyes. These were old and hungry and filled with a hate that went deeper than anything he had ever imagined. "Sir," said Lieutenant Carol Adams, her voice shaking, "we're getting reports from 12 other colonies. The same thing is happening everywhere." Steve grabbed his radio. "All units, this is not a drill. Unknown entities are breaking through dimensional barriers over major population centers. Evacuate civilians and prepare for combat." But even as he gave the orders, Steve knew their weapons might not work. How do you fight something that exists between dimensions? How do you kill something that feeds on fear itself? On Mars Colony, Dr. Ellen Wright watched through her laboratory window as reality bent and twisted above the city dome. The crack that appeared there was smaller than Earth's, but no less terrifying. Through it, she could see shapes moving in the darkness. Things that had no form but somehow still existed. "Ellen," said her assistant Mark, "the computers are picking up some kind of transmission. It's not radio or laser, it's going directly into our minds." Ellen listened and immediately wished she hadn't. The voice that spoke wasn't using words. It was using pure emotion, fear, despair, hopelessness. It told her that humanity was nothing, that they were food for being so ancient and powerful that resistance was meaningless. But Ellen Wright had spent her life studying dead civilizations. She had seen what happened to species that gave up. "Mark," she said, "send a message to all research stations. Tell them to ignore the voices. Tell them to keep working. Fear is what they want from us." At the forge, Captain Morrison and his crew felt the Watchers break through. The chamber around them filled with new images. They could see Earth and all the human colonies under attack. But they could also see something else. The forge was showing them how to fight back. "Captain," said Lisa, "the forge is uploading information directly into our brains. It's teaching us how to see them, how to hurt them." Jake felt the knowledge flowing into his mind. The Watchers existed in multiple dimensions at once. They were strongest in the spaces between worlds. But when they came into normal reality, they became vulnerable. The trick was to force them to fully manifest, to make them choose one dimension or another. "Tony," Jake said, "can our new weapons affect dimensional barriers?" Tony studied the ship's systems. The forge had given them tools that shouldn't exist. "Captain, I think we can do more than affect them. I think we can trap them." Amy was monitoring communications from across human space. "Captain, it's bad out there. The Watchers are trying to break people's minds. They're broadcasting fear and despair on every frequency." "Then we broadcast something else," Jake said. "Amy, open a channel to every human ship, station, and colony. It's time to show these things what humanity really is." Back on Earth, Admiral Sullivan was coordinating the defense from Luna Base. Human ships were engaging the Watchers over every major city, but the battle wasn't going well. Conventional weapons passed through the entities like they were made of smoke. "Admiral," said Colonel Roberts, "we're losing ships fast. These things, they're not just attacking our hulls. They're attacking our minds. Half our pilots are too scared to function." Then Amy's broadcast reached them. Captain Morrison's voice came through every speaker in the fleet. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Ironclad. To all human forces, listen carefully. These things feed on fear. They grow stronger when we're afraid. But they have a weakness. They've never faced a species that gets stronger when things get tough." The message continued. "Humanity has survived. Ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that should have wiped us out. We've been to the bottom of our oceans and the edge of our solar system. We've built cities in the desert and farms in the Arctic. And we did it all because when things get bad, we don't give up. We get creative." Across human space, something changed. On Earth, pilot Sarah Lee was about to abandon her fighter when she heard Morrison's words. Instead, she turned around and flew straight at a Watcher. Her weapons couldn't hurt it, but her ship could ram it, forcing it to become solid to avoid damage. On Mars, the colonists stopped running from the entities and started fighting back. They couldn't hurt the Watchers with guns, but they could collapse tunnels on them, activate mining explosives, and use their environment as a weapon. The Watchers had expected fear and chaos. Instead, they found organized resistance. Humans weren't scattering like frightened animals. They were working together, sharing information, adapting their tactics in real time. Commander Phillips watched from Earth Defense Command as the tide of battle began to turn. "They're becoming solid," he reported. "When they attack us, they have to enter our dimension fully. That's when we can hurt them." The revelation spread quickly. Human forces across 17 star systems began using new tactics. Instead of running from the Watchers, they provoked them into attacking. When the entities became solid to cause damage, human weapons could finally bite back. But the Watchers were learning too. These humans were different from other species. Most civilizations became weaker when faced with cosmic horror. Humans seemed to become more dangerous. The lead Watcher, an entity older than most stars, felt something it hadn't experienced in millions of years: uncertainty. It had consumed thousands of species, but none had ever adapted this quickly. None had ever turned fear into anger, terror into determination. On the Forge ship, Dr. Grant made a discovery that changed everything. "Captain, I've been analyzing the Watchers' energy patterns. They're not just interdimensional predators, they're refugees." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "They're running from something that destroyed their original dimension. They've been feeding on other species to grow strong enough to find a new permanent home." The knowledge hit Jake like a physical blow. The Watchers weren't just hunting humanity for food. They were trying to take over human space permanently. This wasn't just an attack, it was an invasion. "Amy," Jake said, "broadcast to all human forces. Tell them this isn't just a battle. This is a war for the right to exist, and humanity has never lost a war for survival." The message reached every human world at the same time. From the inner colonies to the outer research stations, humanity heard the truth and responded the way they always had when their existence was threatened. They got angry. The Watchers had made a mistake. They had assumed that humans would react like every other species they had encountered. But humans were different. When faced with extinction, they didn't despair. They fought back harder than ever. The real war was about to begin, and for the first time in cosmic history, the Watchers weren't sure they could win. 6 months had passed since the first Watcher attacks. Humanity had not just survived the initial assault, they had gone on the offensive. General Larry Coleman stood in the command center of the newly built Dimensional Defense Corps headquarters on Luna. Around him, soldiers who had been changed by the Forge worked at stations that would have been impossible to understand a year ago. "General," said Major Beth Collins, "Strike Team 7 has successfully closed another dimensional rift over Europa. That makes 15 rifts closed this month." Larry nodded. Beth had been one of the first volunteers to enter the Forge after Captain Morrison's crew. The experience had changed her in ways that were still being discovered. She could see across multiple dimensions and sense Watcher movements before they happened. Most importantly, she was completely immune to their fear attacks. "Any casualties?" Larry asked. "None, sir. The Watchers seem to be pulling back from direct confrontation. They're trying different tactics now." Larry wasn't surprised. The Watchers had learned that humans didn't break when faced with impossible odds. Instead, they adapted and fought back harder. So the ancient entities had changed their approach. Instead of massive attacks, they were trying to divide humanity by targeting specific colonies and trying to turn humans against each other. It wasn't working. On New Texas Colony, Governor Bill Turner watched as his people worked to rebuild after the latest Watcher attack. The entities had tried to make the colonists believe that Earth was abandoning them, that they were alone and helpless. Instead, the colonists had received supply ships from 5 different human worlds within a week. "Governor," said his aide, "Jenny Price, we've got another message from the Watchers. They're offering to spare us if we surrender the location of the Forge." Bill laughed. "Tell them what I told them last time. If they want to find the Forge, they can ask Captain Morrison themselves, assuming they can catch him first." The truth was that Morrison and his crew had become something new. The Forge had changed them from ordinary humans into something that could fight the Watchers on their own terms. They could travel between dimensions, see across time and space, and most importantly, they could inspire other humans to be braver than they thought possible. Dr. Ellen Wright had been studying the changes happening to humanity. Children born after the Forge activated were different. They were smarter, braver, and seemed to understand things about the universe that took scientists years to learn. But they were still human, still curious, still caring, still determined to protect their families. "It's not just the Forge changing us," she explained to President Thompson during their weekly briefing. "We're changing ourselves. Every time we face the Watchers and refuse to give up, we become a little bit stronger." President Thompson looked at the reports from across human space. Production was up on every world. People were working together, like never before. Even the outer colonies that had been talking about independence were now fully committed to the joint defense effort. "Ellen," she said, "I'm getting reports that some of our people are starting to develop abilities without going through the Forge. Is that possible?" Ellen nodded. "The Forge's effects are spreading, not just through technology, but through what we might call quantum entanglement of consciousness. Every human who refuses to give in to fear makes it easier for other humans to be brave." Meanwhile, Captain Morrison and his crew were deep in Watcher territory, fighting a war that most humans couldn't even imagine. They had discovered that the space between dimensions wasn't empty. It was full of the remains of civilizations that the Watchers had consumed over millions of years. "Captain," said Lisa, "I'm reading life signs. Faint, but definitely there." Jake looked at the scanner readings. Somehow, parts of the consumed civilizations were still alive, trapped in the dimensional space between worlds. The Watchers hadn't just killed them. They had imprisoned their souls to feed on their despair forever. "Tony," Jake said, "can we free them?" Tony studied his instruments. The Forge had given their ship abilities that defied physics, but this was a new challenge. "Maybe, Captain, but it would mean fighting the Watchers in their own realm. We'd be outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1. "Amy," Jake said, "send a message back to Earth. Tell them we've found survivors from the species the Watchers consumed. Tell them we're going to bring them home." Amy looked at him with concern. "Captain, that's impossible. Even with our new abilities, we can't fight that many Watchers at once." Jake smiled. "Amy, 6 months ago it was impossible for humans to travel between dimensions. A year ago it was impossible for us to even know the Watchers existed. Impossible is just another word for something we haven't figured out how to do yet." The message reached Earth and spread across human space within hours. The news that there were survivors from ancient civilizations changed everything. This wasn't just about human survival anymore. It was about rescuing everyone the Watchers had ever taken. Admiral Sullivan called an emergency meeting of all human military commanders. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Morrison is planning to assault the Watchers' home dimension to rescue imprisoned souls from thousands of dead civilizations. I know it sounds crazy, but 6 months ago so did fighting interdimensional monsters." Frenil. Robert stood up. "Admiral, what kind of support can we provide? Our ships can't travel between dimensions like the Ironclad." "Actually," said Dr. Hayes, "they can now. The Forge technology has been spreading through our fleet. We've been adapting it faster than we thought possible. I estimate that within a month, we'll have 100 ships capable of dimensional travel." The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. They would launch a coordinated assault on the Watchers' realm, while simultaneously defending all human colonies. It would require every ship, every soldier, and every civilian to work together perfectly. But that was exactly the kind of challenge that brought out the best in humanity. The Watchers sensed the preparations and felt something they had never experienced before: fear. Not the fear they fed on from their victims, but fear for themselves. This species was doing something that should have been impossible. They were uniting not just their own kind, but potentially every species the Watchers had ever encountered. The lead Watcher called a council of its kind for the first time in 1,000,000 years. "These humans are not like the others," it communicated to its fellow entities. "They do not weaken when faced with cosmic horror. They become stronger. They do not despair when shown the futility of resistance. They become more determined." Another Watcher responded, "Then we must destroy them completely. No survivors, no planets, no memory that they ever existed." But the lead Watcher was beginning to understand something that terrified it. "I do not think we can destroy them. They have learned to do what no other species has ever done. They have learned to hope in the face of absolute darkness. And hope, it seems, is more powerful than hunger. Across human space, people felt the change coming. Children drew pictures of battles in space. Adults worked double shifts to build new ships and weapons. Soldiers trained for combat in dimensions they couldn't see. Everyone knew that the final battle was coming. The war between humanity and the Watchers would soon reach its climax. And for the first time in cosmic history, the ancient predators were not sure they would win. Captain Morrison looked out at the swirling chaos of the dimensional void and smiled. Somewhere in that darkness were the souls of countless civilizations, waiting to be freed. It was going to be the biggest rescue mission in the history of the universe, and humanity had never failed to bring their people home. The day of the final battle arrived on a quiet Tuesday. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ironclad, looking out at the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. 150 ships floated in formation around the forge, all equipped with dimensional travel technology that had been impossible just 1 year ago. But they weren't alone. Somehow word of humanity's plan had spread across the galaxy. Ships from 12 different alien species had arrived, asking to join the fight. Most were survivors who had escaped the Watchers years ago and had been hiding ever since. "Captain," said Amy, "we're receiving a transmission from the lead alien ship. It's Admiral Zeph of the Centauri Republic. He says his people have been waiting 300 years for someone brave enough to fight back." Jake opened the communication channel. Admiral Zeph appeared on screen, a tall, blue-skinned being with ancient eyes. "Captain Morrison," he said, "my people were one of the first to face the Watchers. We ran and hid while they consumed our homeworld. We have carried that shame for centuries. Today, we fight to reclaim our honor." Similar messages came from all the alien ships. Species that had given up hope were suddenly willing to fight again, inspired by humanity's refusal to surrender. The galaxy hadn't seen unity like this in millions of years. General Coleman spoke from Luna Base. "All ships, this is command. The dimensional barriers are at their weakest point. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." The fleet moved together into the space between dimensions. Reality bent and twisted around them as they entered the Watchers' realm. What they found there was beyond imagination. The dimensional void was filled with structures that defied physics. Massive prison complexes held the souls of entire civilizations. Energy farms harvested despair and fear from billions of trapped beings. At the center of it all was something that could only be described as a fortress of pure darkness. "My God," whispered Dr. Grant, "there are so many of them." The prison complexes stretched as far as they could see. Millions of years of conquered civilizations, all trapped and being fed upon by the Watchers. The scale of suffering was overwhelming. But Jake Morrison had learned something important during his time in the Forge. Sometimes the biggest problems required the simplest solutions. "All ships," he broadcast, "ignore the fortress. We're not here to fight the Watchers directly. We're here to free their prisoners. Every soul we liberate makes them weaker." The fleet spread out across the dimensional void, each ship taking on a different prison complex. Human ships worked alongside alien vessels, cutting through barriers that had held for millennia. The technology from the Forge allowed them to break dimensional locks that the Watchers thought were unbreakable. The first freed souls emerged from their prisons like stars being born, beings of pure energy who had been trapped for so long they had forgotten what freedom felt like. But as they were released, something wonderful happened. They joined the fight. "Captain," said Tony, "the freed souls are combining their knowledge with ours. They're showing us weaknesses in the Watcher defenses that we never could have found alone." The battle turned from a rescue mission into something else entirely. Every species that had ever been consumed by the Watchers was now working together. The alliance wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about justice. The Watchers tried to stop them, sending waves of their most powerful entities to attack the fleet. But something had changed. The ancient predators found that their fear attacks no longer worked. The combined will of so many species, led by humanity's stubborn refusal to give up, had created something new in the universe. Hope. Pure, unbreakable hope. The lead Watcher, older than most galaxies, felt its power draining away as more and more souls were freed. For millions of years it had fed on despair, but now everywhere it looked it saw hope and determination. The very emotions that gave it strength were being replaced by their opposites. "This is impossible," it communicated to its fellow watchers. "They cannot sustain this level of cooperation. Species always turn on each other when faced with true crisis." But humanity had taught the galaxy something new. Captain Morrison's voice came across all communication channels. "This is what we've learned from the Forge. The strongest metal isn't made in comfort, it's made under pressure, in heat, with hammering. Every civilization in these prisons survived long enough to be worth conquering. That means every one of them has strength the Watchers never understood." The tide of battle shifted completely. Prison after prison was emptied. Freed civilizations turned their combined knowledge toward breaking more locks, freeing more souls. The Watchers found themselves fighting not just humanity, but an alliance of every species they had ever tormented. Dr. Ellen Wright, monitoring the battle from Mars, made a discovery that changed everything. "The Watchers aren't just predators," she reported. "They're addicts. They've been feeding on fear and despair for so long that they've forgotten how to exist without it. Take away their food source, and they start to fade." That gave Jake an idea. Instead of trying to destroy the Watchers, what if they could cure them? "All ships," he broadcast. "New mission parameters. We're not trying to kill the Watchers. We're trying to save them, too." The idea was radical even by human standards. Show mercy to entities that had consumed entire civilizations. Forgive beings that had caused suffering on a cosmic scale. But somehow it felt right. Admiral Zeph was the first to respond. "Captain Morrison, my people lost everything to these creatures, but you are right. Revenge only creates more darkness. Today we choose light. One by one, every species in the Alliance agreed. Instead of attacking the weakened Watchers, they surrounded them and began broadcasting something the ancient entities had never experienced. Forgiveness. The effect was immediate. The Watchers, who had existed on hate and fear for millions of years, were overwhelmed by emotions they had forgotten existed. Love, compassion, hope, forgiveness. The very things they had tried to destroy became their salvation. The lead Watcher was the first to change. The darkness that had consumed it for eons began to fade, revealing what it had been before becoming a predator. It had once been a being of light, part of a civilization that had been consumed by an even older darkness. In trying to fight that darkness, it had become the very thing it had once opposed. "I remember now," the former Watcher communicated, its voice filled with wonder instead of hunger. "We were explorers once, scientists. We sought to understand the universe, not consume it." Across the dimensional void, other Watchers began to remember who they had been before the hunger took them. The prison complexes dissolved as their builders chose to set their captives free. The fortress of darkness crumbled as its inhabitants chose light instead. The war was over, but something greater had begun. The galaxy now had an alliance unlike anything in cosmic history. Hundreds of species working together, sharing knowledge and hope instead of competing for resources. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the ironclad as the fleet prepared to return to normal space. Around them, the dimensional void was transforming. From a realm of darkness into something beautiful, the space between worlds was becoming a place of meeting and cooperation rather than predation and fear. "Captain," said Lisa, "we're receiving a message from the Forge. It says its work is complete. The universe no longer needs guardians to watch for cosmic threats. It has something better." Jake smiled as he looked out at the mixed fleet of human and alien ships. In the distance, beings that had once been Watchers were helping to guide freed souls back to dimensions where they could build new homes and new lives. "What's that?" he asked. The Forge's final message was simple. It has hope. The universe had learned a new truth. When humanity was forged in the fires of adversity, they didn't just become stronger. They became teachers, showing other species that no darkness was so complete that it couldn't be overcome by beings willing to stand together and refuse to give up. Hell had paid attention when humanity was forged. But in the end, it was hell that learned the most important lesson of all. Even the darkest night ends when someone chooses to light a candle rather than curse the darkness. The forge powered down, its purpose fulfilled. Across 17 star systems and beyond, humanity continued to spread. But now they carried with them not just their own hopes and dreams, but the hopes and dreams of every species they had helped to free. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed.